Welcome to Connie Art. Today I am drawing and painting a couple of eyes, and as you can see here, I'm sketching out my eyes to begin with, and up in the corner you can see that my reference image that I am kind of basing this off, and the structure I use to try and get my lines in the spots they're supposed to be. And I do this for a lot of drawings that I do. I will draw lines on them on my tablet screen, and then I will draw from that reference because I find it easier to follow lines sometimes than from the actual reference image. So after I finished the sketching out process, which was pretty basic for this one because it was just two eyes surrounded by a shawl, I went in and wet the whole entire page and laid down my first layer of watercolour. This piece was always intended to be a mixed media piece with watercolour for the eyes and the face part, and then the surrounding shawl I was going to do in gouache in kind of a loose kind of fashion, but it ended up even being more mixed media. So throughout the process I was layering a lot of watercolour, and I decided after a certain point that I thought that I would use some colour pencils that would help bring it up to the standard that I wanted it to be, because I wasn't able to get some of the punchiness with the watercolors without doing more and more layers. So that's what I kind of did. My skin tones, I used a mix of Naples yellow and alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue for the most part, and then for the darker tones I also used some burnt umber. Also later on you'll see that I mixed my own blacks for this piece as well, and I mixed those using some burnt umber and ultramarine as well. I tried to stick to the same few colours throughout the whole painting process, which was burnt umber, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Naples yellow and dioxazine violet also in there a little bit. So since getting back into art and doing watercolour, I've had this real need to want to paint portraits, and I feel like I'd really love to do a portrait of my son in watercolour one day, but I didn't want to try and tackle something like that so big that I know what my son looks like and I need to get his likeness so close, otherwise I'm going to know that it's not right. And so I thought, by starting off on people I don't know, and I've got a bit more freedom, that they don't have to have an exact likeness at this stage, and I can just practice doing the different techniques, maybe choosing some eyes one time, some ears another time, some noses, some mouths, and then trying to put it all together. So I have been practicing a little bit of that lately and I've been really enjoying it, but my golly gosh, it is so time consuming. It takes so long to paint portraits and make them kind of realistic because you have to do so much layering. Just when you think that you've layered it enough, it'll dry, and watercolor being the way it is, it dries much lighter, and then you have to go back in and relayer on top of it again to get the depth of tone and value that you're after. Throughout the whole painting process of painting these eyes, I was questioning myself so much whether or not I was on the right track. It actually took me quite a few days to do it because I would do a small piece and think, nope, she looks like an alien, this is never going to work out, and then I would leave it for the rest of the day, and then I would try again the next day when I felt a bit braver, and slowly but surely she kind of starts to come together and looks more like a human rather than a creepy alien with like these soulless eyes. So I think part of watercolor and painting in general is trying to push through those ugly teenage stages of your paintings where they are just kind of not looking how they're supposed to look, but pushing through anyway to try and get to an end result, even if you mess it up, so that you can get to that place where you need to be. And it's so hard to do. I find that one of the most trickiest things about painting is pushing through that ugly stage to try and get to that final result, which most of the time turns out okay, better than I expected when it's in those early stages. So yeah, it's every time I do a painting I feel like it's a lesson for me to keep pushing through, and yet I still have to relearn it every single time. If you're an artist, do you feel the exact same way that every time you do a painting and you get to that ugly stage you're like, oh no, I've ruined it, but then at the end you end up going, oh, this is not so bad after all? For this part of the painting, I'm doing the eyebrows and I'm just stroking them in one by one with a tiny number 1 brush, or a zero brush I think it was, and that was just a mix of the burnt umber with the ultramarine blue, the French ultramarine. And I also use that for the eyelashes and for the pupils, as well as some of the darker shadows around her face where the blanket is casting a shadow. While stroking the eyelashes in, I always think about how they go together, and I don't try and copy them from the reference image exactly, but I do try and get the feel of them. And sometimes I find that I either do them too thin or way too thick, and they are quite a tricky thing to get right, because there's something that is right on someone's face and you do see them very often, but I think that I did okay in the end. And then I went in with some polychromos coloured pencils and just darkened up a few spots where I think it needed a bit more punchiness, and a really light layer of them, and I didn't really use them all that much. After that, I went in with some gouache. I only used 4 colours, I think it was. Mainly I used burnt umber, a yellow ochre, and titanium white, but I also at the very end, when I wanted it a bit darker, I used a little bit of black in my mix as well to get the tones. And the idea from the beginning was to not get the detail in of the surrounding shawl, but to more have it as a loose, kind of really opaque and punchy version around the soft eyes that are in watercolour. And I think I did okay. I think maybe I needed to use a slightly smaller brush in some spots to get some finer detail, but I also like the loose sketchiness of that surrounding shawl as well at the same time. After I painted the shawl in, I definitely needed to darken up the shadows where the shawl was casting a shadow across the face, and so I did that with a bit more watercolour and polychromos colour pencils. And then I did my favourite part, putting those white spots in the eyes, and just where it's wet and you can see that, and it just brings the eyes to life right at the end there. And then after that, I signed my work, and then I was finished. I was really pleased with how this turned out, especially after so much doubt in the beginning. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.